Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Whether you are joining us virtually in Trinidad and Tobago or elsewhere in the world, we are very happy to have each and every one of you on board with us this morning in this, our 15th edition of the SALISES virtual webinar series. Since October the 1st, 2021, we have been having monthly virtual SALISES webinars. And these webinars are generally intended to raise issues of relevance to development studies in Caribbean societies and providing knowledge and remedies that would assist all entities, all stakeholders who are aspiring to promote progressive development agendas in Caribbean societies. And we touched on a range of issues that are relevant to development agendas in our Caribbean societies. We have touched on issues of statistics. We have touched on issues of crime and violence. We have touched on issues relating to education in the post-pandemic era. We have examined the various budget statements of Trinidad and Tobago, both in 2022 and 2023. We have also looked at the Russia-Ukraine crisis and what impact it has had on Caribbean societies. We have even ventured into economic recovery efforts, and the list just goes on. We have focused on issues of food security and low carbon futures, and a mix of other critical issues that are of interest to our Caribbean societies. Given that Trinidad and Tobago is deemed the mecca of Carnival, and we do have what we take great pride in referring to as a Trinidad and Tobago Carnival brand, which has transcended beyond Trinidad and Tobago across the Caribbean and across the globe. We are pleased always as an academic institute to ensure that we bring to our development discourses stakeholders who can speak eloquently and with a tremendous amount of wisdom and knowledge on issues pertaining to Carnival as a phenomenon in Trinidad and Tobago, Carnival as a phenomenon globally, and indeed Carnival as a revenue generator for Trinidad and Tobago. And we really feel that at this juncture, given that this year's Carnival is going to be billed the mother of all carnivals, and given the centrality that is placed on Carnival as a critical phenomenon in the lives of citizens of Trinidad and Tobago, that SALISES has to also get involved in bringing academic enterprise and, of course, all those professional interests that engage in putting on the greatest show on earth. We feel obligated to bring them in a forum where they can speak and share knowledge about the event that is about to unfold in the next month or so. And certainly, what the future holds in terms of the event that we are about to celebrate here in Trinidad and Tobago. So it is not unusual that SALISES would host these kinds of events and ensure that there is a voice for those who have an interest in Carnival and its evolution. In fact, in the next forum, we may continue looking at Carnival in terms of the aftermath of the event And I dare say the forerunner to SALISES, SALISES being the Arthur Lewis Institute of Social and Economic Studies. The forerunner to SALISES was known as ISA, the Institute of Social and Economic Research. And the Institute of Social and Economic Research was established on the UWI St. Augustine campus in 1970. And in the late 1970s and throughout the early 80s, there were conferences and workshops and symposia convened by the Institute back then, focusing on Carnival as an industry. So it is not a novel phenomenon for SALISES to be engaged in these kinds of discussions. And this goes to show that even beyond those entities that engage in Carnival studies, that entities in the university that thrive and propel scholarship in the social sciences recognize the multidisciplinarity and the interdisciplinarity that prevails in terms of the phenomenon we refer to as the greatest show on earth, Trinidad and Tobago Carnival. And we feel that we ought to really have something to say about it. So it gives me great pleasure to welcome every one of you who has agreed to participate in this event. We want to, in particular, recognize and welcome our dear panelists, Ms. Paige De Leon, Ms. Rosalind Gabriel, Ms. Lucy Hernandez, Dr. Rudolph Otley, Dr. Charleston Thomas, and we are also hoping that Mr. Ronnie McIntosh will join us to bring greetings and to comment on his particular dimension of these proceedings. So what I have done, I have played the role of the chairperson by inviting everyone to the forum, by welcoming everyone to the forum, and by making some initial remarks about what this event is about and how it ties into the work we do here in SALISES. We feel strongly that there are academic and scholarly interests in Carnival, Trinidad and Tobago Carnival, and by extension, all other carnivals that have been derived from the Trinidad and Tobago product. We feel strongly that it is an enterprise that deserves attention in academic and scholarly halls, and we feel that there is we can provide the conduit for producing formal knowledge that can be shared with all and sundry to ensure that it does benefit the future of the event and how it continues to evolve, albeit in a very progressive and positive way. So having said that, I am grateful and thankful to all who have joined the forum thus far, and we look forward to a splendid occasion over the next 2 to 2.5 hours. So thanks to all for making the SALISES 15th virtual forum, and we look forward to a splendid set of presentations. So if I can move straight into the presentations, based on what we do have before us, I think the first presentation is going to be made by Ms. Paige De Leon, and Ms. Paige De Leon will speak on the spirit of the times, demographics, and international forces implications for event promotion. But before Ms. De Leon speaks, what I would like to do is just perhaps review quickly bit about Ms. De Leon by taking a small section of her bio and reading it out to all who. Sorry about that. I had a little accident. Yeah. You have to excuse me. I am traveling overseas and I have limited space within which to operate. So if I can say a few things quickly about Ms. De Leon. Ms. Paige De Leon is a dynamic and trusted global thinker responsible for delivering visionary, inspirational, and typically discrete solutions to complex communication challenges faced by clients functioning in high-risk categories in the state and non-state sectors globally. Ms. De Leon is regarded by her peers and her professional partners as an accomplished professional with 24 years of high-quality, diverse experience in the field of public affairs, from operations in the frontline media to being a senior crisis communications advisor to 3 successive prime ministers of Trinidad and Tobago, and now to running a thriving global public affairs agency. Ms. De Leon has a deep understanding of how to build consensus among dynamically diverse groups. She possesses the gift of persuasiveness when crafting and delivering messages, the ability to employ calm, critical thinking in a crisis and instinctively to be decisive when necessary. Ms. De Leon has served in the Caribbean, Europe, the USA, and the Emirates, supporting major multinational governments, corporate entities, and special interest groups, heads of governments, etc. Ms. De Leon speaks 4 languages and has been educated in London, Paris, Trinidad and Tobago, and Russia. Having introduced Ms. De Leon, I am pleased to invite Ms. De Leon to make her presentation and to let her know that she has 10 minutes to do so. After Ms. De Leon makes a presentation, we shall open up the floor for some questions for Ms. De Leon, because it is my understanding that she may have to leave before we get to the question period. So, Ms. De Leon, the floor is yours, and the audience is free to type in any questions they have for Ms. De Leon, and I will make an attempt to pose those questions to her. Ms. De Leon, the floor is yours. Thank you very much.
Good morning. Thank you so much, Dr. St. Bernard, for your introduction and for giving us context at the beginning. Thanks, of course, to all of your participants. Thank you to the other panelists. Good morning. And unfortunately, it's carnival time. So everyone who's in the industry knows that it is exceptionally busy and time is really, really, unfortunately short. So I will have to leave because we are filming something else just after this. And I will try to make my presentation as succinct as possible, giving you all the opportunity to ask questions, which is probably what everybody really wants to do at this point. So I've been asked to come on this morning as a representative of the event sector in Trinidad and Tobago. I got a really interesting mandate: the spirit of the times, demographics and international forces. The spirit of the times, the zeitgeist. Zeitgeist is one of my favorite words. I often feel it, see it, and use it, and it always seems slightly out of place. And the fact that it's come up today is really critical, because in terms of events in Trinidad and Tobago, the challenge is, and events as specific to Carnival, the challenge is the zeitgeist. The challenge is the spirit of the times that is forcing a kind of change into this space that is not being accepted by the people who are traditionalists, the ones who want to maintain the status quo, and those who feel that they have a responsibility to protect what is intrinsically ours and not have it change and be forced into something that they don't understand. So I remember when I was growing up, there was always this concern about music, about, when Calypso was transitioning into soca and so on and so on. So the event sector finds itself in a very similar place. Events, particularly carnival style events, and there's a bit of a challenge for the sector because the big ticket item is carnival. That's where we see the events really on display and really playing up as the mainstay of the festival. But we must also remember that events are weddings, sporting events, funerals, even conferences like this, other, conferences that are in person and various other things, religious events and so on and so forth. So the event sector encapsulates all of that. But let's, for the purposes of today's conversation, talk about fetes and parties and other types of entertainment products as relates to Carnival. So here we are. Back in the day, people came to Trinidad and Tobago to look at mass on the street. They came to pan concerts and pan competitions, and they came to view other traditional aspects of mass like the Calypso tents, which would have been events. That has now completely changed. The spirit of the times suggests that the people who come here are the people who want to go to parties. That becomes important because it's about branding. The way that we've branded things and the way that we've packaged products has changed from being an attention economy product to being an attraction economy product. That's a whole different proposition in terms of the concept terms that we use to create the products that are events. Demographically, we've seen that experiential tourism, or people who go to countries to experience the indigenous products of a country, has now become the third leading tourism trend globally. What that means is that Trinidad and Tobago, by virtue of its events sector, by virtue of the parties and the fetes, has become a potential global leader in terms of how we attract people to Trinidad and Tobago for our tourism sector and in terms of our events. So demographically, the shift has moved from mass, pan, calypso to events. How has that impacted? So that's the zeitgeist, the spirit of the times encapsulated in what people like, what they want. The demographics have now changed, coming towards the event sector. And the international force is represented by that small statistic that I just gave about how people are viewing the kind of product that the event sector has. What it has meant is that the role being played by the event sector and the event producers in Trinidad and Tobago has become very, very significant. We are in a world where economic shocks are, ravaging small island developing states like ours all the time. And foreign exchange in Trinidad and Tobago is a tremendous challenge. We're essentially a petrochemical industry. We all know that. We have maturing fields. So what we are looking to do by virtue of this, because this is a conference about the future, is to pinpoint and support the alignment and the development of industries that can take us into the future. This sector, the event sector, the carnival party sector, is one of those sectors. How do we future-proof it? How do we support those people who are the practitioners? When we look at their footprint, when we look at their trajectory and their legacy, we see that many of them who have started parties here, simple things, now have brands that exist, are thriving in 15, 20 countries in some cases. And globally, when people want to know how to do the best events in the world, they come here. We see it all the time in our sector. So what we have as a consequence is very experienced and very sought after practitioners. So that's what we're dealing with in this space in terms of the people who are in the space, because all of this is about people. It's about how we develop the people. It's about how we give them resources. It's about how we support them. And this academic exercise that we're engaged in today is about writing all of that down, about templating it and putting it into an intellectual model that then can be used to fuel the dream, to fuel the manifestation of the things. And that's what I'm hoping today's seminar will bring up. How do we get academia to buy in to the value of the event sector as a consequence of those international forces that are telling us that this is the future, this is where we're going, this is a massive economic potential opportunity that we have to support. Academia has a critical role to play in that. And so we're looking for a way to get the two aspects of national life to come together and to be able to support each other through the kind of development that we are looking for. It is not, at the moment, one of the things that's a critical indicator of how the industry is viewed is that an event producer cannot go to the bank and get a loan to host an event. It just would not happen. It's an entrepreneurial model that is full of risk. It can be very lucrative if it is done well and if the practitioner is expert. But that's one of the things that we would like to see as a real signal of change. How do we do that? How do we set it up so that we have the data and the academic underpinning for this sector that allows a bank, a financial institution, an actuarial scientist to go in, do the research and decide this is a good opportunity, this is a good option, this is something we can put money behind. One of the big challenges that the industry faces, and again, I'm hoping that today, when this is brought to the fore, this group of people here is able to assist. We have no data about the sector. The sector is not in a position because it's still creating a sectoral presence and a sectoral framework. It's just always been about parties. Parties are organic. Carnival has been organic. Special interest groups were formed by the state in an effort to fund and support the development and the continuation of the indigenous arts. This particular aspect of the sector has never had that opportunity. So the private sector has now come together and decided that they want to create a sectoral presence. We do not have the resources to do statistical data analysis, to collect data and to analyze it on the basis of how what we do impacts the national pie and impacts the movement of people in and out of the country when events are taking place, how much money they spend in residual areas like in restaurants, like in the supermarket, like in the hotels. And we desperately need that kind of data to be mined and put into place and analyzed so that when we're talking about the value of the sector and how we continue to develop, we have that information available. That's, I suppose, one of the ways that academia is able to support and to assist the development of any new sector, because I do think that this is a new sector. This is a new construct that we're trying to create that gives us a window into becoming like the oil and gas sector, because we don't know if the international trends are to be believed. We may find ourselves as a small country in a position where our carnival, our tourism sector is the main income earner, let's say in 15, 20 years. It's unlikely, but possible. And even if it's not the main income earner, we certainly find ourselves in a position where it is definitely going to be one of the major foreign exchange earners for Trinidad and Tobago. We already have that scenario set up in our sister islands, in Antigua, in Jamaica, in Barbados, and so on and so forth. So we're looking for continued growth of that sectoral presence. This is one of the ways that we think that it can happen. We are also looking at attempting to ensure that everyone understands that when a sector is successful, the way that ours has been successful without the structure, without the academic support, it means that the creative people who are in that sector have mined their own genius and found themselves in a place where they are able to provide anecdotal evidence for lesson plans, for course material. I know there are event courses that happen and so on and so forth, but I'm hoping that at some point we can have a deeper dive into the people who really, really are successful at this thing, find a way to pull that information out of them and share it with everyone else. So that's some of the things that we're looking to create in terms of this relationship and this dialogue that we're having. The event sector is growing by leaps and bounds all over the world. What we have in Trinidad and Tobago is a really well-developed festival culture. a festival template. And festivals are some of the largest tourism income earners around the world. We had about 37 to 38,000 visitors come into Trinidad for Carnival in 2020. This is our first Carnival since then. We don't know what this year is going to look like. It's being dubbed the mother of all carnivals. So far, we've seen depressed numbers at our events. One of the reasons for that, as I'm sure everyone can appreciate, is that we are in an economic crunch and people are challenged in terms of how they, use their resources. We're hoping to see that change in the next couple of days. And we are hoping that as things improve in the coming years, we will see even greater numbers, coming into Trinidad and Tobago for the events. And that spirit that we continue to create, that emotional connection that we're creating with the people who come to our events can be developed and can be grown. We're looking at the state as a facilitator to continue pushing brand Trinidad and Tobago, because having that brand globally understood, accepted, and known about is what is going to draw people and pull people into this attraction/fun economy. So I think that's how I'd like to present the industry in terms of what we're doing conceptually, how we feel about its growth and development, what our potential needs are with specific reference to this fora that we're in now, where we're talking to academics and we're answering questions and looking to build relationships and develop. So I hope that that's sufficient and it gives some context and that questions can be posed by anyone about where we go next and how we feel about our industry. So thank you so much once again for having me. I am so sorry that we cannot stay longer, but this time of the year just gets so insane for all of us, and it is what it is, but it's lovely, and we are grateful and really, really grateful to be here today. Thank you so much to everyone.
Thank you very much, Ms. De Leon, for that very insightful first opening session of this forum. As I mentioned last year, around this time, we also had a similar forum looking at hosting Carnival in the era of the pandemic. And now we are actually looking at the future of Carnival, notwithstanding the fact that we are still in some ways threatened by the pandemic. And your reference to the lower numbers, quite apart from the economic circumstances that individuals encounter, I suspect there could also be some concerns about the pandemic and its post-Carnival impact. But nonetheless, what you had to say was very pertinent insofar as, demonstrating the transition and the transformation of the product we refer to as Trinidad and Tobago Carnival. And I particularly like your reference to the zeitgeist and, its importance in appreciating the fact that perhaps, the most constant thing in life is change, and we have to ride with the times, so to speak. So as far as the theme of your talk was concerned, I think you hit major elements of it. And we are hoping in the next month to have a similar forum looking at post-Carnival discourses. And again, I think some of what you spoke about will feature among the speakers. Certainly, I intend to speak because as a demographer, I think, there's a demographic dimension of the Carnival that we completely ignore. And it resonates well with a lot of what you would have said. We are mindful of your need to move on to other businesses. And I have here a question for you as well.
20 more minutes for questions. So just to say, so there's a bit of time, and then obviously other presenters have to come on. So.
Okay. Yeah. So I will start with the comment first of all. Apparently, the questions and comments are suddenly coming in fast and furious, right? Of course, one of the comments, this was very informative, Ms. De Leon. So that came from Iberia St. Martin Howe. And the question from Francis Hanson Lewis goes as follows. Good morning, Ms. De Leon. I'm actually doing my thesis for the MSc in Tourism on event tourism product development with use of the Carnival sector. And it goes on, my question is simply, if and how can I contact you, because I would love to interview you as part of my research, right? So I suppose you can, I suspect you can text us your contact if you wish, and we will try to get on to that person who should send us his or her contact as well. So that is how I think that will work. And then I saw another comment coming up in the chat directed to your presentation, and it goes as follows. Thank you, Ms. De Leon. You have stated facts. My PhD research in tangible cultural tourism as an option for economic diversification would have investigated T&T festivals as a thrust of the experience. Let me see what it, oops, I think I lost that. Let me see if I can get back to it. Yeah, let me see if I can get back to it.
So I think the person is asking eventually, because I have the question here, do you see orange economy as playing a role? So
yes,
if I'm to understand what the orange economy means, and forgive me if I'm wrong, because I'm not super familiar with it, it's where we cost intellectual property and goods and services as experiences. I hope that that's reasonably accurate with regards to this. And I think if I am correct, it perfectly encapsulates what the event sector is, because we get up, we put on our clothes, and we go to a party. We don't realize the steps that it takes to get a party to be good, and the amount of moving parts that an event producer has to be able to corral and facilitate smooth, seamless, and efficient operation to get it to the point where it's a good fit and you want to go back. And that's the case with a wedding. I think that people perhaps would understand better a wedding because they have a more intimate experience with a wedding. It's very much the same in terms of the moving parts. So I do think that this type of concept is valuable. And just to go back and say that one of the reasons why this particular interaction is so great is because we will then be able to legitimately apply concepts like the orange economy to our event sector. And that gives us credibility. It gives us a lot more legitimacy than we unfortunately currently have. So I do think that that concept as an overarching type of thing is very, very important in terms of where we move and go for how we go forward with our sector. Absolutely. I do think that it is playing a big role, and it should play an even bigger role. And hopefully, as you're doing your PhD, you will share and give us more information and help us to plug that type of concept into our sector, because one of the things that's important is that the people who function and practice are not necessarily academics. They're not necessarily academics. They're practitioners. They're lay people, as it were. And so we too need your support to get us to bridge that gap. So that's what I think this question about the orange economy does very, very well. So thank you so much for that.
Okay, thank you for the questions that have been posed. I don't think I've seen any more questions coming forth. But before we move on to the next presenter, I just want to accept the challenge presented by Ms. De Leon with respect to the need for academia to become more involved in working hand in hand with entities such as hers, and to ensure that, you know, the data collection apparatus is properly placed to facilitate the important work that they continue to do in enhancing the fortunes of Trinidad and Tobago. And as she eloquently said, you know, even without the data, the success stories are there already. if only because of the passion that those who engage in the sector, in the events promotion sector and other related sectors, if only because of the passion that they bring to this thing we call Carnival. And I think beyond the passion, there is the science, the data collection, and how do we assure ourselves that we are collecting reliable data and embracing valid mechanisms to collect reliable data so that we have valid data. I think that essentially is critical. And we at the university do have the skills to support that. And this is why these kinds of discussions are so important, because too often Gong is somewhat separated from town, and there has to be a point where Gong meets town, and this is one of the opportunities, and SALISES is really championing that. Through these operations, we are becoming more in tune with what the folks out there want and how the university can get more involved in making these things happen, and really improving the fortunes that are sought by the efforts that you make. So certainly, I am looking forward to some discussions. I know Dr. Tull was supposed to chair this morning. She isn't here because of other engagements that she has. Again, everybody is busy. But I've heard Dr. Tull and Dr. Nurse talk over and over again about the absence of data. And I think, being a statistician, I'm speaking in terms of my role in the university as a statistician, as someone who collects quantitative data and analyzes quantitative data. I certainly am willing to join the four and see how, we can make a difference somehow. And certainly, given my tenure in the university, I should have more time. So hopefully we'll see how that can happen. So Ms. DeLeon, our hearty thanks to you for making it in this busy time of your professional life. We thank you from deep within for making it our forum today and delivering such insightful comments in your presentation. Our heartfelt thanks to you.
Thank you very much. I do see one more question. I hope that I can answer it.
Please do.
It's from Avaria St. Martin. How? I hope that I've pronounced your name right. Do you think that we have moved away from local inclusion to a more international inclusivity? And how do we keep our local residents included outside of high prices and rates to be involved in the carnival? So this is a really big question, and it's one that we regularly answer. Well, the second one. The first one, of course, absolutely yes. We have moved away from local inclusion to more international inclusivity. We have a situation where, as I've said, this Trinidad and Tobago Carnival model, this Trinidad and Tobago FET model, because it's the FETs that cause people to come together at a particular time and do a weekend, let's say in Atlanta or in Florida or in London or in Brussels or in Holland. There are carnivals in all of those places, and they're all pretty decent, and they all follow the same model of Trinidad and Tobago's FET lineup. You have 6 FETs in 5 days, and everybody goes to all the FETs and they have a wonderful time, and that's the model. So globally, that model has been replicated. And every time it's replicated, there are Trinidad and Tobago nationals and the same practitioners that you support in Trinidad who are there making that happen, because they are the experts. They are the ones with the brand power. That attraction economy belongs to them. They own that attraction economy in this area. So absolutely, globally, it's there. It's been recognized. One of the things that the association that I represent is hoping to do is to align itself with other international organizations that run festivals, different kinds of festivals, not soca, not calypso oriented, but other genres of music, because it's a festival. And what we hope that will facilitate going forward is that our genre of music and our cultural fruits can then be included in those international festivals. What everybody's looking for is eyeballs. Eyeballs create movement, and that movement is translated into dollars and cents. And at the end of the day, this is a business model. So we're hoping that that international inclusivity is going to continue to draw people towards us. With regards to the pricing structures, this year in particular, the cost of everything has just, I mean, it's gone up so much. It's really quite scary for the event producers. One of the things that I can say is that we've seen a rise in the cost of trussing and stage infrastructure and fences and all that kind of stuff. It's gone from in 2020 being $8 a square foot to this year going up to between $14 and $20 a square foot. That's a double, that's 100% and more an increase in terms of what is being paid. The cost of the performers has gone up from 20,000 in some cases to 40,000 easily. So that the prices that we're seeing this year, I think that some people have raised their prices, many haven't, because they recognize the challenges, particularly in these early events, so that the prices are going to keep going up, just like the price of food has gone up. With regards to options, there are many. I think that one of the challenges people have is that everybody wants to be in a particular band, in a particular fete, because the branding is so powerful and the brand promise has been kept. But there are other options, there are other opportunities, there are smaller promoters, smaller events, smaller mass bands. I don't believe that I have seen that people cannot access Carnival if they want to. They simply cannot access every single one of the aspects that they would want to because of whatever economic capacity they have. So if we walk away from everybody wanting to do the exact same thing, there's tons of stuff that's available for everybody to do. Everybody can participate. Carnival is spread across the country. For the first time this year, we're seeing so many fetes happening in Siparia, in Chaguanas, in Point Fortin, in Sandy Grande, in all sorts of places that we didn't see it before, because people are starting to understand that there is value in this particular enterprise, and they're using their geographic location and the proximity to get people to come on board. So I think that we're going to see a change in terms of how everybody's trying to come to one party on one day. The whole party sold out. Nobody can afford it. That's the market. This is a commercial enterprise. So I hope that that, answers the question just a little bit in terms of where we're going with regards to keeping people out because of pricing.
Okay, I think, we have come to that point where we should be thinking of releasing Ms. De Leon. There have been a few more comments that have been made, but in the interest of time, I've been receiving warnings already that we have to be mindful of time and the other speakers. So again, as I said before, thank you very much, Ms. De Leon, for gracing us with your presence. And we wish you all the best in all your activities as you go forth this carnival and all other carnivals and events that would follow in the future. Thank you very much. And you shall be hearing from us at some point in time again. Thank you a whole lot. Okay, at this point, we move straight into the next presenter, who is Dr. Rudolph Otley, and he will be speaking on the vitality of the Calypso art form in an evolving carnival product, reflections and projections. But before Dr. Otley begins his talk, I would just like to say a few things about Dr. Otley, so at least the audience has a sense of who Dr. Otley is. Dr. Rudolph Otley pursued and completed his tertiary education, mainly completed in Toronto, Canada, where he gained a Bachelor of Arts degree in Sociology and Latin American and Caribbean Studies from the York University, and a Bachelor of Education degree from the Ontario Teachers Education College. He also attained a Master of Science degree in Vocational Guidance and Counseling from Niagara University, New York, USA. Upon his return to Trinidad, he completed his tertiary education at the University of Trinidad and Tobago, where he graduated with a Doctor of Philosophy degree in Carnival Studies. Culturally, he has been a member of the Trinbago Unified Calypsonians Association organization since its inception in 1993. During his years at TUCO, he held the position of marketing manager for 7 years, produced the 2018 Demanche Gras Show, and the 2019 Kaisorama Calypso Monarch Final at the Queen's Park, Savannah. He is the owner and manager of the Divas Calypso Cabaret International, the world's only all-female calypso tent that this year is celebrating its 19th year. Having said that about Dr. Otley, I now invite Dr. Otley to make his presentation to the audience, the virtual audience. Thank you very much, Dr. Otley.
Good morning, and thanks for the introduction. And I want to thank Leon, Ms. Page, for her stimulating presentation a while ago. Yeah, my topic this morning is the vitality of the Calypso art form in an evolving carnival product, reflection and projection. And when we think about Calypso, we have, from my research, it is quite obvious that Calypso has always been a vibrant part of the Caribbean ecology, but more specifically, the Caribbean and the Trinidad Carnival. And the vitality stemmed from that early experiences on the plantation, and then it transitioned to the barrackyards, and later on to the Calypso tents. So Calypso has really been embedded in our DNA as a people in the Caribbean, but more specifically so on the island of Trinidad and to some extent in Tobago. Vitality, when we talk about Calypso and Carnival, we must go back a bit and reflect on it. In the early days prior to 2000, or even, let me correct that, prior to 1979, the Calypso determined a number of things in the Carnival. It was the music we fetted to, we partied to. It was the music that defined the road march in association with the steel bands playing it. But in 1979, something happened whereby with the boycott of the steel pan from the panorama, DJs became the major suppliers of music during the street festival on that fateful 1979 Carnival. And out of that incident emerged a DJ phenomenon whereby the DJs have now taken over to a great extent the music we are exposed to on the streets of Carnival during the Trinidad Carnival. And that has resulted in a lesser extent to the devaluation of the Calypso music around Carnival time, especially on the streets of Port-of-Spain. Secondly, as Paige was saying a while ago, the events or the things surrounding Carnival have now become events. So you witness a decline in attendance at the Calypso tents. So that we had a period in the 1960s and 70s, and even up to the early 80s, where the tents were the major event place for people to go to or attend during Carnival. That has diminished in terms of numbers. A number of issues we could raise about why it has diminished, but I won't get into that now, given the limited time. But the point is, after 1979, with the pan losing its luster on the streets of Port-of-Spain, and then later on, in terms of some issues surrounding the Calypso tents, the Calypso has lost some of its vitality as we move into the 21st century. Why it was so vital in that early period? Basically, Calypsonians were people who were engaged solely in the pursuit of creating Calypsos. Their major focus was on the Calypso. They lived the life of a Calypsonian, and living the life of a Calypsonian meaning basically no other field of engagement or employment concern or matter to these individuals. And therefore, year round, you could have seen them with their guitars or in the tea shops or in the road practicing and honing their skills. So you had people who lived the life of a Calypsonian, who traveled from a village to village or from island to island, singing Calypsos throughout the year. What happened or resulted from that type of lifestyle is that they developed their own language. They developed the ability or the craft of being very precise and succinct in the language they use. It also became critical for them to be entertaining, to gain people's attention in these tea shops and in these bars or rum shops where they visited. So critical to the survival of the Calypsonian was to be able to hold the attention of his audience. And therefore, that person had a language of his own, and a language that was based in the local panag, the local culture, the local way of saying or doing things. They composed their songs using Calypso language, and maybe later on we could talk about what I mean by that. So that was the forerunner of the Calypsonian in that period. When we look forward to this Calypso product, we have confronted by a number of things. One, the declining number of patrons in the Calypso tents. The fact within the Calypso tents, when you go now, you are not getting what I call genuine Calypsos. You're getting editorials, journalistic editorials that are prepared by non-Calypsonians. And that's a major distinction between yesteryear and what we have now. As I mentioned before, the Calypsonians of yesteryear, most of them, although we had their ghostwriters too in that period, but most of them composed their Calypsos, and they did it using uniquely Calypso language. Today, we have people who are not Calypsonians, who are basically lawyers and teachers and other professional people who write Calypsos for people who sing Calypsos and who are not necessarily totally engaged in the art form, but see Calypso as an economic vehicle rather than as a vocation, a lifelong vocation. And that has resulted in what I call the dirge in the Calypso tents, whereby you sit for hours and you listen to these long editorials. The same things you may have read on the papers, you will hear it in the Calypso tents of nowadays. And therefore, the distinction between what you heard in the tents then and now was that even though the matters were seriously addressed in former years, most times they would have been presented in a more entertaining, a more engaging manner, whereby the attraction or the discourse was to gain your attention, keep you engaged, but also leave you with something to think about whilst you're listening. Today's Calypsonian basically presents what we already know. Now that could be because of the era, the age in which we live with technology, but even that is not an excuse, because what I'm saying basically is that the people who are engaged solely in this skill have become more interested in not in the lifestyle of the Calypsonian, but in the rewards to be gained from being a Calypsonian in this era, and the reward being centered around the achievement of being crowned Calypso monarch, where there's a large prize money to be attained by that. And comparatively then, we had a number of humorous Calypsos and Calypsonians from the past era. You could remember people like Cypher, you could remember people like Spoiler. Although Attila presented a lot of social and political commentaries, he also had his sphere of humorous Calypsos. Think today, how many Calypsonians could we define as being seriously humorous? Think of it. And therefore, the entertainment value has decreased in the Calypso tents, thus causing a further decline, because people are already burdened by all the social issues of crime and economic depression. And then you go into an environment where you sit for 3 to 4 hours and you get that same thing that you already, the thing that you have been running from in your own life, at home, the depression, your lack of resources, and you come to the tent and you get that same thing put back in your plate. So that too has also caused that decline. And therefore, what I'm basically trying to get over the point is that the goals of the Calypsonian have changed drastically from the 1960s to what we are dealing with in 2022 and 23. There's also what I call a political affiliation attached to the Calypsos of the late 20th and early 21st century. Now, Calypso has always been politically designed. Most Calypsonians and most Calypsos have a political tinge to it, because that's the nature of Calypso. It came out of that era or that lifestyle of protest or seeking the justice for the poor man, as they say. But now we can clearly see an identification of political alignment in the calypsos that we keep hearing between 1995 to now. Again, it has a lot to do with, but as we would say in the community, eat a food mentality. So some of the Calypsonians are more interested in pleasing the political directorate that they support than dealing with the political issues of the society in a real, unbiased manner. That too has affected the Calypso tents, because when we talk about Calypso in the context of the carnival, the forum or the place to focus on is the Calypso tents, not the radio stations, because they don't play Calypsos. So that when we have to analyze the Calypso, we must go back to the Calypso tents. And from what we are seeing, even in 2023, with the minimum amount of people attending these shows, it's obviously something to be concerned about in terms of the survival of the Calypso art form, and more so the survival of the Calypso tents. My thesis, though, basically is that the tents will always, not that the Calypso tents will survive. We have to do some redesigning, we have to do some restructuring, we have to do some marketing, a different kind of marketing, and we must attract a different audience. The different audience meaning we have to attract young people to the tents. How do we do that? And I'm saying that in the context that when we look at the junior Calypso competitions in Trinidad, we have an abundance of young people who are engaged in the junior Calypso competitions. When they leave secondary schools, though, they switch to soca, because soca seems to be what is getting the airplay. Soca has the high-profile entertainers like Marshall and Onji and Destra and Patrice and these people, and they see them on TV. When last have we seen a Calypsonian on television, except for when they pass away? So there's no immediate connection with the young people and the Calypsonian. And therefore, we have to find ways to connect the young people to the Calypso art form. Keep those who are interested in from the junior school and ensure that they learn the art of creating the music, because that is where they're going to be attracted to. When we teach them how to create Calypso, by affording them that skill, or affording them the opportunity to develop that skill, we will get more of them to continue seeing it as a career. But if we leave it solely up to the writers to produce for them, then we're going to continue to have some problems there. We also have to bring the IT platforms into the Calypso tents, the virtual Calypso tents. It was used between the last 2 years of the pandemic, and where people were really interested. You were home, given our crime situation in the society, maybe that's the way we need to go, by having virtual tents whereby you can sit in the luxury of your home and be entertained. And how, therefore, the marketing and advertising of that product will also have to be discussed and worked out in a very logical way. We also have to deal with the question of, even if it's a virtual tent, are we going to continue with 24 Calypsonians and they follow one after the other? Or are we going to do as was done in the early days of the backyard, include drama, include folklore, include the masquerade, include the steel band in the shows of the Calypso tents? Because that was one of the attractions also in previous years, whereby you go to a Calypso tent and you'll hear and you'll witness a drama. You can remember one of the more famous ones, Stella, with Lord Nelson and Bill Trotman and Sparrow and Rigo, going through a whole scenario of a wedding, whereby an older man was attracted to a young woman and they acted out in song. And that is the song that was created by Lord Nelson, but they dramatized it. And therefore you had theater within the Calypso tent. You had occasions when Desperados or Casablanca was playing the Calypso tents. So you had a varied program, but that has stopped. And what you do get in the tent nowadays is just the continuous monotony of supposedly political satire that deals and is presented in a way that you're already familiar with. It's like a journalist taking his written work from the newspaper and you're reading it in the calypso tense, which, as I mentioned before, is unattractive to the person who is already burdened by those kinds of issues. And my final comment on that is that the ownership of the calypso tense have to be addressed. Since I think it was the National Commission, NCC Act, which in 1998 afforded TUCO the ownership or the rights of the Calypsonians in terms of protecting the Calypsonians. TUCO somehow misread that mandate in the context that TUCO has so far viewed that mandate to believe that they should be the sole proprietors of calypso tents in Trinidad and Tobago, whereby in their own way, they have pushed out the private ownership of calypso tents. That in my view, that has critically devalued, and as Chowdhury will say, they put too much water into the brandy. In other words, once you're a member of TUCO, you become eligible to be selected to a TUCO calypso tent. What that has resulted in is that we have mediocre calypsos and mediocre calypsonians being now assured a place in the calypso tents because TUCO owns 6 calypso tents. In years gone by, when people like Jazzy Panton and Still Taylor, private business people who own the tents, you had to earn your selection to the tents. Nowadays, selection is based on membership, and in a way, what we have developed in the Calypso fraternity is what I will call a CPEP mentality, whereby people pretend to be Calypsonians and are aligned to Calypso tents simply because they are members of a union, which is TUCO. That has seriously damaged the product, the Calypso product that we have. In order to get back to the forefront of the Calypso art form or the Carnival as Calypsonians or as the Calypso product, we need to seriously address that issue and open the market whereby private enterprise afforded a greater opportunity and access to the top Calypsonians so that the products presented in the Calypso tents will maybe once again improve the level where it becomes more palatable to the average. I thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Dr. Otley, for that very insightful and rich presentation. And clearly, you have really spent a lot of time immersing your mind into the issues that bedevil the Calypso art form and how it is evolving with the passage of time. Clearly in your presentation, it brought out the multidisciplinary and interdisciplinary dimensions that really inform how we begin to treat with revitalizing, if that is the correct word, that we have to do in terms of, ensuring that the Calypso art form as a genre in the Trinidad and Tobago Carnival product continues to live. And you offered some remedies which I think are useful and certainly opened the minds of those who witnessed your presentation in terms of the kind of interventions and commentaries they may wish to make based on what you have presented to us today. So again, thanks a lot for your presentation, and we will hear more about it as the question and answer period comes into being. We now move on to our third presenter, who is Ms. Denise Hernandez, and she is going to be speaking on panorama, street parades, and concert halls, historical antecedents, and the future of the national instrument. But before Ms. Hernandez makes her presentation, I would just like to quickly go through a brief bio on Ms. Hernandez. Denise Hernandez is currently the Secretary of the Central Executive of Trinidad Incorporated. Formerly, she held positions as Education Officer on the Central Executive of Trinidad. She is a retired principal of San Grande Secondary School, and she served there between November 2000 and December 2013. She has served as the president of the Association of Principals of Public Secondary Schools between 2011 and 2013. And Ms. Hernandez has been a stage side player in the Massey Trinidad All-Stars since 1996 and apparently presently continues to do so. Ms. Hernandez holds a master's degree in education, teacher education from the University of the West Indies, and she obtained that degree in 1992. And she also holds a diploma in educational administration, also from the University of the West Indies in 1990. She holds a Bachelor of Science degree in biochemistry from York University, Toronto, Canada, and she obtained that degree in 1978. So that gives you a brief synopsis on who Ms. Hernandez is, and I would now like to take the pleasure of inviting Ms. Hernandez to make her presentation. Ms. Hernandez, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Dr. Sinbadal. Good morning, everyone. My topic is on Panorama, the historical antecedents and the future of Panorama. This year, 2023, we are celebrating the 60th anniversary of the competition called Panorama. It started in 1963. Now, before that competition started in 1960, before we had Panorama, in the early years, as early as 1949, a champion steel band was always selected on the Carnival Sunday night at the Queen's Park Savannah. But in 1958, that competition was moved to Carnival Friday night rather than the Dimanche Gras show. And it was given the name of Carnival Bacchanal. And then in 1963, it was changed, the name was changed to Panorama. And Panorama involves the steel bands performing. And we have, for these 60 years, seen dramatic improvements in what was started as a competition among bands, generally all bands, into what we have today, a competition that embodies five distinct categories, let me see. Right. Steel bands developed in the 60 years, a lot of it due to the fact that they're taking part in Carnival, a lot of it due to the fact that they had sponsorship, and a lot of it due to the fact that in communities, it was a means of keeping the young people there and keeping them together and keeping them away from what we call the negative aspects of society. The steel bands ruled the days in the early Carnival scenario because they provided the music for masqueraders. But with the amplification of music with the DJs, it showed and it created a decline of steel bands on the streets for Carnival Monday and Tuesday. Also, in its historical antecedents, steel bands played in Carnival fetes throughout the season. Some steel bands would divide into 3 groups in order to service these fetes. But today, the opportunity to play in fetes is no longer there, because, and as such, it has caused the bands to focus on Panorama. So in 1963, when Panorama was held, a lot of our bands were already mobile, they were on wheels. So it made it easy for the competition to attract and be interested to all persons. In 1975, the single pan category was created. This is a category where the players play only one single pan, as distinct from the conventional bands where they play, the bands is a collectively made up of many parts of the steel family, which is our tenors, or double tenors, double seconds, the guitar range, which be double guitar, triple guitar, the cello range be triple cello, four cello, the tenor bass, and the basses where we can have a player playing as much as 12 basses at one time. So the competition created and generated and caused the development of steel bands in many communities. What it developed as well is a passion by the persons around those steel bands in those communities to support the bands. And this support was shown by the fact that it was important that you got your jersey of the steel band on the day that the band is performing. And even today, bands spend hundreds of thousands of dollars in providing jerseys to their supporters. In 1963, Anthony Williams and Pan Am Jet Note Stars won the Panorama competition. At that time, prize monies were very small. Today, the Panorama prize money to the large conventional category is $1 million. Sorry. So we see that we went from a competition that started with steel bands as a group to now a competition where we have our categories. The single pan category, which involves a maximum of 35 players. We have small conventional category, which involves a maximum of 60 players. We have medium conventional category, which involves a maximum of 90 players. And then we have the giants, the large conventional category, which involve a maximum of 125 players. As such, Trinidad and Tobago, small island nation, could probably have the most amount of musicians for a country in the world, because we don't only have our steel bands, and there are over 300 of them listed in the country, but we also now have the Pan School program, where almost all of our schools have 25-piece ensemble sets, and this has allowed them now to take part in Panorama. Hence, in the junior Panorama category, we have three distinct areas. We have the primary schools having their own competition, then the secondary schools, and then we have what we call the 21 and under, those non-school categories. So Carnival time, Panorama time, is a huge event in Trinidad and Tobago, one that should generate a lot of money for our steel bands. Our problem is that the psyche of the Trinidadian and the Tobagonian, the steel pan is ours and it should always be free. So I'll talk a little bit more on there when we look at the future. Now, when the steel pan started early, simple arrangements were played. Now, if you listen to steel bands today, the arrangements are very complicated, even down into the primary schools. And this has allowed the steel bands to develop and Panorama to become what we generate as the best street parade in the world. However, we do find that with Panorama, because of the concentration for many bands in terms of learning just one piece of music that they play for either 6 or 8 minutes, it has stymied the effect of the bands going into what we consider economic generation. So Panorama started with the bands playing calypsos, namely Kitchener, Sparrow, and others. And then in 1972, Ray Holman made the bold step of entering Panorama with his own competition, Pan on the Move. Some people were taken aback by it, but it spawned a generation where we looked at other people, not necessarily calypsonians singing a calypso to be a Panorama piece, but persons composing music for the Panorama, or for Pan, as they say. And this has been followed by other arrangers and composers, Alvin Daniel, Len Bootsy Sharp, Ken Professor Fillmore, Jit Samaru, Clive Bradley, Godwin Bowen, Robert British, all followed suit in terms of composing sounds. So we look at the fact that this is an area where young people for the future can become composers of music for the Pan, for Panorama time, but also for other aspects of the long activities that we have. Then in the 60s, early 70s, bands started receiving sponsorship through a call from Dr. Eric Williams that asked corporate Trinidad and Tobago to become involved. And sponsorship brought a level of further recognition to bands and to the Panorama competition. Because for sponsors, on that Panorama night, on that final night, let's say, bands are wearing your jerseys with your company's logo, it's great advertisement for them. So you will find that many sponsors look at the fact that being involved with a steel band can generate revenue and advertising for them in terms of their products. So today we have a lot of sponsored bands, but we still have a lot of unsponsored bands. And in August last year, our Prime Minister, Dr. Keith Christopher Rowley, once again called on corporate Trinidad and Tobago to get involved with sponsorship. And the sponsorship should really not only just be for Panorama, but in terms of all the things that steel bands do in their community. All right, in 1966, there were 26 steel bands that were sponsored. Today, we have just only 19, because over the years, there's been a decline in sponsorship, and hence a call for the Prime Minister for bands to get in, companies to get involved. Judging in the panyards. In order to save costs, transportation costs of bringing all the band supporters Spain to the Queen's Park Savannah, in 2002, Pan Trinbago took the bold step to start the Panorama preliminaries, judging bands in their panyards or on community basketball courts or in an area close to their home. This saved over $1 million in transportation costs, but it generated what we have today as the interest of people in Panorama, with the social media coming on board in terms of their life. So for this year, for example, every preliminary competition, every band, every venue was on Pan Trinbago's Facebook page live. So all over the world, people were able to sit and listen and watch. And that interest is generated even further because it allowed some people to have preferences in terms of which band will win which competition. The social media aspect has brought Panorama out into the open even more, because when you go into the country areas, some people wouldn't go, but you can actually get there. And we find that we have started the medium conventional competition recently, and then we have the large. And for those people who have been in Trinidad and Tobago, on the night of the large preliminary competition, we have what they call the Panyard Caravan. Thousands of people in maxis and in their own private cars going from band to band, listening to these bands as they compete with the adjudicators. It is a huge experience for someone to be able to feel the energy and the vibes that that part of Panorama brings. So when we think of Panorama and its historical development, a lot of people say, where do we go from here? Well, one critical aspect of that development is showing very clearly now is our young people who have become the arrangers of steel bands, graduates of UE and UTT, who have now found niches where they are using the single pan and the small conventional categories to develop their arranging skills. And we saw it, for example, in this year, our single pan final, high standard of competition, the small band final, and even greater high standard of competition. Sunday, just recently, we had the junior Panorama, and even among our under 21 bands, a high standard of competition, all very young arrangers. So for the future of Panorama, we don't have to worry about arrangers and bands not having an arranger, because our young people are coming out of our universities and they are getting involved in learning from the present stalwarts, like Dr. Sharp, Smooth Edwards, etc., the basis of good Panorama arrangements. It is also going to augur well in terms of the fact that some of these young arrangers will find it can be a career for them in terms of other bands in other islands, in other parts of the world, inviting them to come and be guest arrangers. So we are generating a revenue stream for some of our young musicians. What we are also generating from that is further and redevelopment of our steel bands. Some of the steel bands that have stopped functioning because they now have a young person in their area coming out of UTT, taking the reins to bring those steel bands back. What we have also had in the years that we've looked at our steel bands and the future is that the music, the type of music. Now this year particularly, we find that a lot of the bands are going back to the old scores. You know, they're playing, a lot of them playing Black Stalin and Blacks in tribute. But it allows our young people to look at the future of Panorama, to listen to the old arrangements of the music of Kitchener and Sparrow and Black Stalin and these others, to help them develop their own style. So in terms of Panorama future, one bold step that the 2019 executive took was to decide to split the categories of Panorama into 4 distinct competitions. Generally, all of this will happen between January and February. But looking at what was happening and the fact that some of our categories were being crunched, in 2020, the single band category was done in November. Small band category started in December and finished in January. We had the junior panorama in between them. Then we have the medium category and then the large category. But an even bigger change to panorama, which we see to benefit a lot of people, especially on the island of Tobago, is moving our medium finals to the island of Tobago, giving it its own space. And in 2020, we were surprised and shocked by the number of persons who traveled to Tobago just to participate in that panorama and who are looking forward to medium finals in Tobago once again. So breaking them up into these categories and splitting them apart, we find that it allows now for our panorama competition to develop further. Greater interest is going to happen in the panorama competition. And we also find that for the bands, the very steel bands who are the basis of this competition, it will allow them to be able to generate revenue, because when people come to their panniers with the permanent pannier fraud, or people come to purchase their jerseys because they want to be involved, this is where we're going to go. Panorama is going to develop. It's in its categories, it will become bigger. We may have to further divide categories, but the point of being part of the history of Carnival in Trinidad and Tobago, Carnival in Trinidad and Tobago is pan, mass, and calypso, basically. And we feel that our panorama competition, which draws a lot of persons from outside, we have a lot of foreigners who are now applying to come and perform with steel bands of panorama. So in the long run, and over the years, at this 60th anniversary juncture, panorama has earned its place in the history of Trinidad and Tobago and in our carnival situation. But we expect that in the next 10, 15, 20 years, it's going to be bigger, it's going to be greater, it's going to be wider. And for many of our panelists, it's going to be an area where they can feel proud of the skills that they have in playing that, what we call our national instrument. We feel that women in pan, another great development over the last 60 years. In the initial stages of steel band, you didn't find women. But today, we could roughly say that almost 75% of the panelists are females. And we do have female arrangers, we do have female managers and captains, so that here we have allowed our women, our young girls, to take a road that they can be proud of and develop themselves. And we also find that as a result, we see the young women now challenging in terms of they want to be involved and learning skills. Because in the panyard, and one thing that we know from panorama, when we are preparing for panorama, we need the skills of welding, painting, designing your t-shirt, designing your banner, designing your flag. These are things. So panorama provides economic opportunity, not only for the players of the band, but for skilled persons in the community to earn employment. So the future of panorama, as we see bodes well. It is generating interest from abroad. We expect that, having come out of a 2-year absence, this year we've seen a lot of interest, and we expect it will grow over the next few years. And we expect to see maybe bigger dividends in terms of the way in which, or more categories to the panorama competition, because there are so many more bands coming on board and being involved. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Thank you very much, Ms. Hernandez. And again, a very spirited presentation, extreme amount of passion displayed. And we are very thankful for your reflection of the transformation of the PAN and Panorama over its 60-year existence. It's pleasing to know that we are celebrating 60 years of the PAN this year. And clearly, as was the case when Paige de Leon presented, your presentation does open up and really resonate well with academics, insofar as I listened to your presentation, there was a sociology of PAN and economics of PAN, governance issues as they relate to the administration of the steel band movement, among other interesting disciplinary perspectives that were brought to bear upon your discourse. And this tells us, the importance of bringing town and gown together, so that within the university setting, quite apart from the fact that those who are the administrators in bringing to life these events in the various genres of the Carnival presentation, there is also need for the science to be there to support the passion. And I think we can only be better off if that is the case. So again, Ms. Hernandez, thank you very much for your presentation. And I would like to move swiftly into the presentation by Dr. Charleston Thomas, who is going to be talking about planning, presenting, and benefiting from the Tobago Carnival product. And it is our duty in SALISES, whenever we have forums that treat with issues of national importance, that a Tobago voice be represented. And certainly we think that Dr. Thomas is an ideal candidate to speak on these issues on behalf of Tobago. So Dr. Thomas will make his presentation, but before he does so, I just want to say a few things about who Dr. Thomas is. And Dr. Thomas is the current chairperson of the Tobago Festivals Commission Limited, and he is also a linguist and musician. He is a former lecturer in cultural studies and currently does work on the language and sacred music making traditions of Tobago. His current work is artistic in nature, bringing together prose, poetry, and music into an extended expression of the experience of growing up and living in Tobago's village, rural environment, as well as in Trinidad's thick urban and university setting. Short and sweet, and I now invite Dr. Thomas to make his presentation. Dr. Thomas, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Good morning. Good morning. Are you hearing me well?
Yes, I am.
Good. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for having invited me. I'm particularly intrigued to listen to the conversation thus far regarding Carnival and the future of Carnival. And I think I would actually begin by talking about the last aspect of the biography that was read, the brief bio that was read by Dr. St. Bernard, all right? and perhaps begin really by trying to tell a brief story of my own experience in Tobago as a way to capture what I believe to be somewhat the spirit of Tobago living, all right? So I grew up in a very conservative Seventh-day Adventist tradition and home. And in that community, in that home, it was surrounded by spiritual Baptist churches. So I, from growing up, was immediately surrounded by Protestant Christianity, as well as versions of African spirituality, all right? In that context of growing up, there was no room for Carnival where I was concerned, all right? Because of course, coming from the Protestant tradition, Carnival was something to be within the realm of Satan and the devil. And we weren't therefore allowed to participate in activities related to Carnival. In fact, the tradition was Carnival meant a shift to the bush where we would have camps, all right? Carnival camps, they were called, in order to keep the Seventh-day Adventist and other Christian communities removed from the Carnival activities. And that was pretty much my growing up years until I started to become teenage years, where the taste for Carnival was very strong. So of course, I started to, quote unquote, run away from home to do what was the biggest thing in Tobago at the time, Juve, all right? And of course, the ways in which I was reprimanded didn't stop me from returning to you know, run, jump through the window and get to meet with my brethren and them, all right, to get to Juve and enjoy what Tobago had to offer back then as Carnival, right? Which was for me, indulging in the Juve event. Then I moved to Trinidad and moved also into the Orisha faith. And that shift happened when I was a student at the University of the West Indies, studying modern languages, all right? And that's the time I started to become more involved in things of Carnival, all right? So of course, I moved away from the Seventh-day Adventist tradition and into a new spiritual tradition. And in that tradition, there was room for Carnival, all right? In fact, back then, my real entry into Carnival was through Ella Ander, all right? Whose music I used to follow, and then I met her, and she pretty much took me into some of her practice sessions and whatnot. So that's how I got into Carnival in the very first instance. And then I moved into the business of mass making with folks like Noble Douglas, and on the fringe of mass making as well with Peter Minshall, all right? And I became a masquerader for about 10 years or so with all the big bands, you know, the Tribe, the Island People, Trini Revelers, which was a very huge band at the time, and with Minshall as well as with Brian McFarlane, all right? So I did a fairly wide coverage in terms of my mass playing experience. And then of course, I became a student of cultural studies at the doctoral level, studying the business of how we express ourselves in relation to music, in particular, all right, in relation to music, as well as how we express ourselves among matters of intimacy in relation to Carnival, all right? So that there is a short capsule of one person's experience of growing up in Tobago in a particular context of religiosity, and then moving into the business of academic studies, but also moving into a different realm of spirituality, and therefore finding a different kind of experience in Trinidad, and therefore in Carnival, and therefore in Trinidad, all right? So I have been moving away from that story and into the presentation which I've been asked to do, which really is on planning, presenting, and benefiting from the Tobago product, all right? So I have been the chairperson at the Tobago Festivals Commission from May, thereabouts of last year. So I have just about 6 months of being there. And since then we have, so just a little bit about the Festivals Commission Limited. We are the company charged with the mandate to execute pretty much the indigenous and tourist-based festivals on the island. And these would be the Tobago Heritage Festival, the Tobago Jazz Experience, the Tobago Blue Food Festival, and the newly conceptualized Tobago, the October Carnival, all right? And what therefore will be, is what I have put together as a presentation really is are my observations of what we are imagining this thing called a Tobago product to be. My observations in terms of what planning looks like, what is determined to be presented, as well as hopefully a discussion around the question of benefiting, you know, who does the benefiting, who determines who is to benefit, and so forth, all right? So if we are really talking about planning, presenting, and benefiting from the Tobago product, I've always put myself as a long-term student, you know, to do a kind of critically distant observation and jot down my observations as findings. So this is really what constitutes my notes, all right? The Tobago product, really, what really is this thing that we are calling the Tobago product? And one of my observations thus far is that the Tobago product really is an aspiration born out of desires, or out of the desires of Tobago's residents, all right? We have, for instance, the October Carnival is the outcome of years of effort to imagine and bring to the fore a carnival-like product that accentuates Tobago in different ways. And then on the national carnival level, all right, the product is equally the outcome of continuous effort, all right, by stakeholders on the island to identify a product that distinguishes itself from that which is perceived to be a different product in Trinidad, all right? And therefore to try to establish the national carnival as its own character, all right? But in both cases, the question of the product really seems to me to be one of aspirations, all right? What kinds of aspirations we have had, and how do these aspirations take shape and fit into something called an event for people to engage, all right? So in these two instances, right, what emerges as a product, in my mind, is a consequence of passions, perspectives, desires, plans, but all working towards a kind of understood, of course, aspiration, but at the same time operating as sites of contestation, all right? So we have a wide variety of people involved in the business of talking and bringing carnival into the streets. And the fact that we have this wide variety of individuals engaged in this event means that we also have a wide variety of competing perspectives. And that's what I mean by being a site of contestation, all right? So in this sense, the Tobago Carnival product in relation to the October Carnival, you know, I kind of worked out a formulaic approach, mathematical formula. So the Tobago Carnival product in relation to the October Carnival would equal an event that really has just seen the light of day, and that is ready to be shaped and fashioned into itself. It grows. And then in relation to the National Carnival, all right, then we might think of the Carnival product as an event that is in a process really of transition. Transition because it now has to share space and share room with this newly born product called the Tobago October Carnival. And it also is in this long history of establishing some kind of distinction with the Trinidad version of Carnival, all right? So in both cases, the product is either new or the product is in transition, all right? So I think the question of a Tobago product and how to plan present, and benefit from a Tobago product really has to do with how to plan, present, and benefit from newness, and how to plan, present, and benefit from something that is that is ephemeral in transit. So there are certain questions, therefore, that I think one will have to ask if one has to properly eke out the nuances of this focus. All right. What does planning actually look like? So one of the things that I have been observing very carefully as chairperson in the Tobago space is the way in which planning for Carnival actually happens versus how planning for Carnival ought to happen if there is such a thing. All right. So what we know, what I have observed, is that the folks involved in the planning of Carnival seem to have a sense of exactly what needs to be done for this moment. All right. And it has worked in some instances quite well. All right. But to the extent that there is an overall sense of clarity regarding precisely what the structure of planning looks like, as chairperson of the Festivals Commission Limited, I can't yet say that I've got that very acute sense. All right. So one of the things that I think we want to ask, if we're talking about the business of planning Carnival and planning Carnival in the context of a Tobago product in particular, is really, what are we planning? And what does the planning structure in fact look like? All right. So we have 3 primary entities in Tobago who are involved in the planning process. That, of course, would be the special interest groups mandated by the government to bring certain aspects to the Carnival. The company, right? I've already mentioned what we do, and of course the administration. All right. But in terms of the clarity of the nature of the relationship between all these 3 entities, and therefore the processes that are supposed to accompany the nature of the relationship between the entities, all right, those things for me haven't quite yet been properly worked out. Perhaps they have been worked out in people's minds, but in terms of a template that guides how people move with particular actions in order to get the best out of something, I think that question of how planning looks, what the planning structure actually looks like, is a primary and key question if we have to talk about how to plan and present Carnival and the Tobago product in more specific terms. All right. And then that naturally is linked to the next question: what therefore is presented? All right. And who determines what is presented? Oftentimes, I mean, now I'm seeing it from a different perspective, having taken up the position as chairperson. But because I've been involved in Carnival in the ways in which I've been involved in Carnival for so long, the noises around Carnival have always been the same. Either there hasn't been enough money from the government, or we will make do with what there is, or nothing yet has come, right? Those comments and realities have been the case for quite a long time. And the fact that they now somewhat echo in the Tobago space in a little more, with more magnification, it simply really has to do with the fact that we have a new product, right? But the noises are by no means restricted to the island. In fact, it's a national challenge, all right? We hear it all the time. And therefore, that day alone tells us that there are still perspectives that compete for the business of determining what really is presented in a product, a new product, the Tobago product, right? What goes onto the street? Who determines that, all right? And of course, naturally connected to that is the next question, the question of benefiting. How does benefiting look? Who benefits? Who determines the borders of benefiting? Who determines the terms of benefiting? Now, that therefore is a very important point, because if I could return to this story a bit, coming from a Seventh-day Adventist home, and being cultured to be removed from Carnival at an early stage in my life, all right? When I returned, or when I entered into the Carnival fraternity more confidently at a later age, right? I was always aware of what kinds of prejudices or what kinds of discomforts I was working with. I had to negotiate that. I had to reconcile that, because I had come from a place that saw what I was currently doing as satanic, all right? And one of the things that has always been of concern to me is really, I think Paige did a great job in pushing us to think about the word demography, all right? So in terms of who determines what is presented, who determines what the plan structure looks like, and therefore who is to benefit in a Carnival product that is called the Tobago product, all right? Then we have to come to a place of talking about what is the demography of Carnival, right? What really constitutes the corners of individuals who have to live here and who have to experience Carnival, either with participation or by participation. And for those who do not participate, what does Carnival mean for them, right? Given their prejudices, or given the fact that they may have their own ways of conceptualizing culture in that form, all right? What would be the kinds of conversations to have us come to a place of recognizing that Carnival is in fact a force to be reckoned with, and therefore, how do we make room for everybody in Carnival, all right? I'll be a little bit more specific with that, all right? So in my mind, I think the Carnival product, given the force of Carnival as a collective form of cultural expression, given its historical evolution and contestations, and given its shaping of TNT's civilization, all right? It would be folly to talk about Carnival only as a celebratory event, right? Or in economic terms, kind of like is culture, all right? It may be more useful in my mind to identify Carnival as a moment, right? The Carnival moment, a happening in time that has a character that is frenetic and tempestuous, wild and outrageous, yet organized, pointed, and serious, full of knowledge, and importantly, makes room for everybody, right? Even those who do not wish to engage the hype, the color, the music, the songs, all right? So key for me to planning a new product is the question of what constitutes the Carnival demography, which is what I'm actually addressing now, right? So we can think about the Carnival demography in a number of ways. We could classify ourselves into a number of ways, in other words, all right? So we have the Calypso, the Pan, the Mass Fraternity, and all the associated folks. We have the soca arena, the media, the vendors, right? The spectators, different classes of spectators, the different classes of fete goers, etc. But we also have the demography of the non-participating demography, all right? And we might have the Christian or religious communities, or folks who just retire from Carnival participation, active participation. In fact, in some of the years that I played Mass, I remember having friends who came from the States, and they were in the realm of the fete goers, right, in that model. And they weren't quite interested in playing Mass on Tuesday and Monday. In fact, once they fetted out the soul, by Sunday morning, they would come to Tobago and enjoy the serenity, all right, of Tobago, because at that point, they had it, all right? So I'm saying that if we are to properly talk about a Carnival product, right, and we have to plan for that product and talk about presenting and benefiting, then it is, I mean, paramount that we discuss the business of the Carnival moment, or think about it like a Carnival moment, and therefore, what does that moment mean? Now, I have to mention this very quickly. Just yesterday, a promoter in Tobago shared a story with me regarding the damage to somebody's hearing loss, right? Because of how long and how much time they had spent doing DJ music. So we also have another kind of conversation to have about the damage of Carnival, in terms of the planning for Carnival. The way in which the population in Tobago has stretched within the last 15 to 20 years, right? So we have more clustered living, and naturally our churches, as we know in the Caribbean, they're built into community. They're not separate from community. So we also have now the question of noise pollution and what that means for our own Carnival passions and celebrations. So I think I would leave it there for now, because I think I've mentioned all my major points, but I really just want to stress that any conversation about planning, presenting, and benefiting a new product, the Tobago product, which is now the fancy term for the new product, right? Or the fancy phrase for the new product, a larger conversation, I think, has to be had regarding how we think, how we imagine, how we conceptualize Carnival, right? And what really are the structures of planning and the processes required to make Carnival into the thing that it really is, right? A character that has room for everybody, and everybody has to live. Yeah, I'll leave it there for now. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Thomas. Again, another spirited presentation. And I think when we think about the Tobago product, we have to see the Tobago product as perhaps a two-pronged product, because in one sense, we have a national carnival product, Trinidad and Tobago Carnival, that is celebrated as a pre-Lenten event. And when we think of Trinidad and Tobago Carnival, while much of the activity or most of the activity is concentrated in Port of Spain area, there is room for community celebrations and community festivities, whether in San Fernando or some other towns in Trinidad, as well as in Tobago. And I think, there has to be some component of that takes care of Tobago. But in terms of the event we saw in Tobago last October, it is really a Tobago-specific event, and I think, we can think of the presentation in light of this two-pronged observance of a Tobago product, albeit bearing in mind, the demography of the Tobago event that Dr. Thomas spoke of, and I think there is some merit in some of the comments he made about that particular concept. So thank you, Dr. Thomas. And we have to move swiftly into our final presenter, Ms. Rosalind Gabriel, who is going to speak to us about the evolution of the masquerade in the Carnival product of Trinidad and Tobago. And just to say a few things about Ms. Gabriel. Ms. Gabriel was the last child of 7, and it was at her Stone Street home that she got her first glimpses into the wonders of the Carnival world. As a child, she would hear iron beating in the steel bands coming from Park Street near Globe Cinema and proceeding west. Right away, shoes would be on and she would be ready to run to the corner to see who was passing. The excitement was real for her as a child. The sights and sounds that she saw and heard then still resonate with her today. Ms. Gabriel has collaborated and worked with a number of designers, band leaders, and artisans who helped to tutor, shape, and guide her. She's honored to name a few of them, among them Peter Minshall, Stephen and Elsie Leung, Stephen Shepard and Stacey Wells Partnership, Wayne Barkley, Sean De Freitas, Cito Velasquez, Joanna and John Humphrey, Chris Santos and Gregory Medina, Roger Myers, and last but not least, Lil Hart. Lil Hart played a great part in encouraging her to start producing bands for children. The above collaborations, together with her many years of experience in the production of costumes and bands, have resulted in many coveted children's bands titles. She has not only worked in Trinidad and Tobago, but regionally and internationally as well, Along with a dedicated team, she has produced both adult and children's costumes for carnivals in Grenada, St. Martin, St. Thomas, Curacao, St. Kitts, Anguilla, Miami, Washington, D.C., New York, and Texas, where such bands have won their national and territorial titles repeatedly. Having read the resume of Ms. Rosalind Gabriel, I now take great pleasure in inviting her to make her presentation. Thank you very much, and the floor is yours, Ms. Gabriel.
Sorry. Thank you very much for that wonderful introduction, Dr. Godfrey St. Bernard, and hello to all the panelists. And I have to say that I relate to a lot of things from all the panelists who presented ahead of me. And first of all, I would like to say that although I have been bestowed an honorary degree, Doctor of Letters, quite recently by the UE, my presentation today is solely one of having learned my lessons on the street in the mass camp. So it is not from any academic platform I will present to you this morning. I would first like to say that one of the things that drive me or has driven me all these years, nearly 50 years now, is a passion that burns in my chest for the love of the culture, which I'm sure is the same for all here this morning, Dr. Otley, Dr. Thomas. I feel strongly about the culture of our country, and I feel strongly that Trinidad and Tobago became known for our culture in the wider world long before we had an oil-based economy. In the days when Bosco Holder and Aubrey Adams used to travel the world to showcase our culture in every corner of the world. And the sights and songs that I saw as a child, the sights of George Bailey's Merry Old England, Ye Saga of Merry Old England. I must have been about 7 at the time when I saw that band and could still remember it. Those are the things that drive me today. And I keep always in the back of my head that if one of these past icons were here today, would they see and approve of what I do? So that's what drives me every single year in the production of the children's mass. I have been involved in adult mass, but certainly not to the extent that I feel for the children, because the children wear what we give them. The children want to be part of a story. I'm not necessarily seeing that happening in the adult mass at this time. So based on that, I would like to mention that I feel strongly about the education of children in mass, the same way Dr. Otley mentioned, teaching the young ones who are singing the calypsos to write the calypsos that they sing. I keep saying that we should be creating a nursery for mass, because it worries me deeply. Who is going to be the next Peter Minshall? Who is going to be the next Wayne Barkley? Who is going to be the next George Bailey? We are not seeing the type of bands that made us known for having the greatest show on earth. We are not seeing the creation of those types of bands in today's carnival. And it pains me. And I would like to commend the program that I see that has elevated the young people in the steel band movement. I stand to be corrected by Denise, but the Pan in the Classroom program, I believe, was one of the best programs that was ever instituted to do with our culture in the classroom. And I am a strong proponent of mass in the classroom. I have been trying for many years to see a program like this instituted in the classrooms, because I'm worrying that in this last year or through the COVID years, if we look back, we could see a quantity of our mass icons and calypso icons and Pan. We have lost them. They have gone to the great beyond. So I feel confident that Pan is in a good place as far as that is concerned, but I'm not feeling so good about mass being in a place like that. So that's one of my biggest peeves, that we need to create a nursery for mass, a nursery for calypso writers, etc., etc. How are we going to do this? And I thought the forum today would have been an excellent place to mention this, an excellent forum to mention this. On a lighter note, I would like to say that I understand Dr. Thomas's running away to play Juve, because as you mentioned, where I grew up and where I lived for many years of my married life, I climbed over the wall to run away and play Juve, leaving home a husband and 3 small children. So I understand that feeling. I mean, it was uncontrollable. The Juve band was outside the house in the road, and I was inside the house. So I made a quick escape, having changed my pajamas. That was a good thing. So these things that fuel these feelings that make you act in a certain way. It's just, you can't explain it. It's just unexplainable. The things that motivate you as far as Carnival is concerned. As far as creating bands, creation of bands for me are sacred. And that when I do begin the thought process of what I'm going to do for the next year, it's prayer. I pray to the Almighty to give me the idea of what would glorify the Almighty God and glorify our country, because the themes that I choose to produce must have a deep sense of educational value for the children. They must be taught what part they play in the story of the creation. So just to give you a background of what motivates me, I thought would have been important in this forum. I'm not a very good example of the economic side of Carnival, because when I do begin to create, I get carried away, because I want to see produce what I have in my head, and it does not always equate with the selling price of the costume, because this is children's mass we're dealing with, and the children's mass really cannot, you cannot really sell the costume sometimes for what you produce it for. And that's where a bit of sponsorship would help in these cases. But also too, on the economic side, junior bands don't really generate a lot of sponsorship like the as I would describe them, the party bands or the business bands generate. So those are the things that, you know, I would have liked to say to open the session. What I also would like to say is that another peeve of mine is remembering what I saw, and this is in line with the evolution of the masquerade. The sights I saw in my young days, some of them are Imperial Rome by Harold Saldina in 1955. Ye Saga of Merry England by George Bailey in 1960. Edmund Hart's Flag Wavers of Siena in 1962. And Irvin McWilliams' The Wonders of Bucco Reef in 1971. Those sites are in my head after all these years. And I cannot say that anything that I see now can compare to what I saw then. And so the evolution of the masquerade is disappointing to me at this point in time. A lot of what we see now are bands that have no identity. They all look the same. They all have the same colors. They have no historical meaning. And in the days that I could remember very clearly, there were some historical presentations that actually had a placard with a picture of the king or queen to show that what was being worn by the masquerader was a serious historical presentation and exactly as it should have been presented. I mean, I don't expect that we would see that today, but I do believe that the bands that present today ought to give something back to our culture because they gain from it. And I think they should give to it, not only take from it. Having said this, I could tell you from my involvement these last 5 decades, there are 2 distinct types of presenters in Carnival. There are those that would pawn jewelry to bring a band in the traditional categories of mass. And then there are the business bands. 2 distinct and different types of presenters of mass. I'm not saying anything is wrong with the business side of Carnival. No, I'm not saying that. But what I'm saying is I do believe that we could give to our culture, because the culture of a country is sacrosanct to me. Promoting our culture, contributing to our culture and supporting our culture. And I do believe that all the participants of Carnival should have that in mind when they are preparing presentations, because We were known as the greatest show on earth, and I feel today, 2023, we should still be able to claim that, but I do not feel that we could truly claim that title at this point in time. Also, I would like to say that I served on the board of the NCC from 2018 to March of 2021. And this is in reference to something that Paige said. I was one of the first people who sat on the NCC board whose hands were actually in mass, who knew that if a decision was taken at board level, it would have a negative effect on people who were creating mass, because the people who are sometimes in the administration of mass could make a decision who have no idea how it would go down the line in a domino effect and affect the mass makers in a negative way. So I was happy to be there for the time and be able to guide certain decisions that would have had a negative effect on the creators of mass. Another fact is that the money in mass doesn't really come to the people who create the mass. The money in mass, you may see the NCC gets 147 million. The money in mass goes to the people who own the tents, who put up the infrastructure, who owns the stages, who provide the toilets, etc., etc. That's where most of the millions go. And a small percentage of that money would go to prize money or sometimes assistance to unsponsored bands. Well, that hasn't happened for a few years in mass. And so the distribution of the funds, it is argued in mass that mass people sell their costumes. But as a band leader, and knowing the background through and through, I could say that a lot of the bands, especially in the traditional medium and small band categories, for the band leader to see their presentation on the road, they have to give away a lot of the costumes. And that is a reality. I mean, I don't know how widely known this is, but I actually know of an Indian band who have to give away most of their costumes so that they could see their small presentation on the road. It's very sad, but it's the truth. And this is happening in a lot of bands. I wouldn't say in the large band category. I would say this happens in medium bands, small, and groups, and in junior bands. So although they would say, oh, the band leaders make money selling their costumes, we don't need to assist them. A lot of these bands really do need assistance. Another thing that worries me is, of course, as I said before, the losing of our icons. And so quite recently, the Trinidad and Tobago Carnival Museum was born. This museum came about because the First Citizens Bank had a building known as the Penny Bank, which went in the newspaper sometime in 2020, I think, in an RFP, and the TTCBA and the Carnival Institute of Trinidad and Tobago responded, and the RFP was successful. And so the Trinidad and Tobago Carnival Museum was registered as a non-governmental organization. And at the moment, the renovations are being done, and an exhibition, we're hoping to put up an exhibition in time for Carnival 2023. I'm part of that board. That board consists of TUCO, Trinbago, and the Trinidad and Tobago Carnival Bands Association. And we are collaborating with Dr. Joan Tull from UE. We are collaborating with NCC, with the Carnival Institute, with NALIS, with all the stakeholders to get that museum up and running, hopefully by 2025. And this was a direct result of us worrying about educating the young ones. And when I say the young ones, I mean the children of primary school age, because I know that UE and UTT takes care of the older ones in the Carnival Arts program, etc. So these are all the things that that I'm interested in to contribute to our culture, and recognizing the urgent need to invest in the passing down of our cultural traditions and history. So based on that, I would also like to say that being involved in Carnival, and in especially a Carnival band, I worry about where the band leaders of tomorrow are coming from. Producing a band has taught me so many life lessons, dealing with difficult personalities, public relations, accounting, marketing, organizational skills, critical thinking, problem solving. So much value can be learned by our young ones if we could teach them all of the aspects of what makes up our cloth of mass, our culture. So based on that short presentation, I now hand over.
Okay, thank you very much, Ms. Gabriel, for that very passionate presentation, which also reflected your many years of experience and, of course, your critical thought process with respect to the masquerade and the evolution of the masquerade. And clearly, we have work to do, having listened to your presentation, and I hope the powers that be would certainly respond positively to the many things you said. We have a short period of time to entertain some questions, and I have a question that is posed by Keith Maynard, and perhaps someone can answer. I don't know if any one of the panelists can answer the question. Do we have an estimate of the size of the carnival sector? That's the question. I don't know if any of the panelists can answer it. If not, perhaps someone from the audience who might have an answer can share the answer, and I'll get it to Keith Maynard. Any one of the panelists is free to answer.
I'm sorry, I missed the question, Dr. Godfrey.
Do we have an estimate of the size of the carnival sector? I suppose it might be an economic value.
I have recently heard our chairman, when I say our chairman, my past chairman, Winston Gypsy Peters, say that Trinidad and Tobago earns 100 million every carnival. But to tell you the truth, I don't know where that data is. If it is in writing, I've heard it many times. I've heard it in board meetings, but I would subscribe to what you said in your opening comment, that a lot of data is needed, because when something is being researched, it's difficult to find even where to go to research, to research. And this is why we were so, I would say, devoted to seeing the Carnival Museum come to fruition, so that all the information could be in one place. I'm not saying we're trying to reinvent anything or reinvent the wheel, but we would like to be able to have, or to be able to have all the information electronically or otherwise housed and links to all the stakeholders through the Carnival Museum. It's one of our goals. Of course, I would like to mention again something that Dr. Thomas said about funding of culture. Because in my opinion, every successive administration has pushed culture to the back burners. We are always the last to be funded. We get the least. We never get what they say we're going to get. There have been many years I have known that we are supposed to get X amount, and X amount never comes into the account. So what happens year after year, what we owe to suppliers grows and grows and grows and grows. So it is funding is a big problem.
I could just jump in there, if I may, to add another layer to the mix that Rosalind just laid out there for us. So we don't get what is promised, and whatever comes never comes quite on time. And what comes also comes in trickles. So let's say you're supposed to get $100,000, all right? You might end up getting 50,000, but the 50 never comes as 50. So you might get 20,000 today, and next $10 next week, etc. Right? So that there is precisely why I glossed the business of how we plan. How do we actually plan Carnival? How do we actually allocate budgetary resources for the business of Carnival, right? And how do we make it predictable, right? And not unpredictable, which is where we tend to find ourselves quite often.
Okay, thank you for that. I have a question. I have a few questions here for Dr. Otley. And the first is prefaced by a comment. I completely agree with the fact that often the element of entertainment is missing of late. Having grown up listening to Calypso with my parents, in recent times, I find the offerings are very complaining. Many sound like laundry lists of complaints. The humor, melody, etc. is not there. Has this feedback been given to bodies like TUCO, and is there awareness of these issues in the Calypso fraternity?
Thanks for the question. Definitely TUCO is aware of that kind of feedback through its membership, through the General Council, and to people such as myself who constantly interact with the TUCO executive. I think though it has boiled down to what I said earlier on, in that what we have is a cadre of individuals who see Calypso mainly as an avenue for revenue earning, and not as an avenue for cultural development in the true sense of what we will have called a true Calypsonian. There are people who can sing, and they see winning a monarch as an avenue for funds to be gained. So for them, is to understand the criteria for selection to the 10th, understand the selection to make it to the final, and then whatever goes with it. So Tuco is aware of it, but Tuco is also one of the major perpetrators of it, because as I said before, Tuco has, through its membership, they have devalued the character, the status, and the competencies of who or what is a Calypsonian by selecting people based on pure membership. So for example, Dr. Thomas, if you just go to Tuco's office and say you're a Calypsonian, you fill out a form and you become a Calypsonian. So there are no official competency levels of testing, whether it's academic skills, training, whatever, to validate one being defined as a Calypsonian. So some people see it as I said before, an avenue for earning money during the carnival season. So what they present is what they feel could guarantee them some income over this 6 weeks of carnival.
Okay, thank you for that. And I don't know if your recent comment might be related to answering the second question that is posed to you. What is your opinion of the quality of the production of Calypso tents? And then the audience member goes on to say, consumers are better informed as to the quality of entertainment and are unwilling to sit through long shows and with mediocre talent.
The quality of the tents leaves a lot to be desired. And the reason for that is that there's a traditional element. And again, I'll go back to Tuco. There's a traditional approach to running a tent business that existed since 1921. Tuco and its ownership and its membership are having challenges in terms of how they change that paradigm, how they change that structure of what a Calypso tent should be. In other words, you go to a Calypso tent, the lights are dim, the stage is a lot of cluster of sponsorship. There's no smoke screen, there's no, all of the things that soca artists put into their performances, that's lacking in the Calypso tents. In other words, there's something staged and something very boring about even the appearance of the Calypso tents. Added to that, you have the drudgery and the uncondensed or the very long vocabulary and words and structure of the Calypsos. Again, that goes back to the fact that the Calypso tent has moved away in this instance from the tradition of entertainment. It has now become political party number 2 or number 1, where they use the tent as a platform for exercising or exposing their political beliefs, rather than entertaining the audience in even the same political matters of the day. Don't get me wrong, politics is a major part of our culture, whether it's pan, Calypso, or mass. But in terms of the Calypso, the information is now presented in too much of a journalistic way, rather than in an entertaining manner.
And then there is a third question for you that is prefaced as follows. My magic word for guiding my thoughts and actions is relevance. In this regard, what is the relevance of the Calypso tent for the survival of the Calypso art form? Can Calypso survive without it? And I presume that it is a tent.
The day we remove the Calypso tent from the carnival ecology, Calypso will die. And I'm saying that tongue in cheek because Calypso will never die really. But the Calypso tent maintains the traditions, the institution, the opportunity for Calypsonians to vent, to show their skill, to display their skills. And if we ever should make that mistake, that will be one of the quickest ways to eradicate the art form of Calypso from Carnival and from the society in general. The Calypso tent, although they are outdated in the way they exist today, they play a very important function in the Carnival. we are hoping that it could be revitalized, and I'm sure it will be. If two things happen. One, TUCO takes its hand off of the management of the Calypso tents and the Calypsonians in a direct way, bring more private business into the Calypso arena, just as it's done in mass. You know, that one of the things that I'm aware of in terms of the mass organizations like TCB and NCB and all those organizations, they play a very a guided role in terms of how the mass functions, but you don't see bands owned by the NCBA or TCBA directly. If that should happen, if that should allow to happen, sorry, it will happen like what is happening in Calypso. Any Tom, Dick, and Mighty joking board, once he or she becomes a part of the organization of TUCO without any basic criteria to do so, they come and they ensure they are employed for a certain number of weeks in the carnival, because TUCO does not vet, does not test, does not, they have auditions, but it's the same people who continue to be selected, because the value is not on what you produce, it is is if you are a member that determines your selectivity to the Calypso tent.
May I ask a question? I suppose it's also a comment.
Yeah, please.
All right. So the question I raised in regards to planning, what that planning structure for Carnival looks like. Dr. Otley, I think what you're talking about is, just on point. But the question I have therefore would be, if you have successive governments with the responsibility of allocating funds to NCC, let's say, all right, to bring Carnival to the public, what kind of responsibility would there be either on the part of NCC or on the part of the government, any government, to make a certain kind of dent, to make a dent on what happens in the Calypso tent?
Yeah. I strongly believe that the government's financial support for culture is way below the value that they give. And also, as you rightly said before, it's untimely. It's never given on time. But I feel though the money given is directed in the wrong places. The money given for the Calypso tents are for competitions and for what they call the operational 6 weeks of the Calypso organization called TUCO. I would like to see more, what I would like to see is that the government put money or invest money in the training of young people who are interested in becoming Calypsonians. And I see that in the context of having prolonged courses, not a 2 days or 2 week course in Calypso writing. You have a year of Calypso writing sessions, you have stage performances, you have communication on stage, you have the females, attire, makeup for the stage, things that not only enhances the individual, but also the art form. And therefore, the monies that are given out now, to me, does not help in development. What it does do is to ensure that TUCO has a tent out for Calypsonians get something for Carnival. That is not developmental. All that is doing is propagating a system and a tradition or a way of life that we have all accepted is not as glamorous, is not as entertaining, is not as exciting as it should be. So that's my position on that.
Okay, thank you for your answers, Dr. Otley. I have some questions now for Ms. Hernandez, and they go as follows. Why has the precious national instrument been driven off the streets and out of parties during Carnival by amplified music, including and especially that of DJs? Why has public policy failed to establish the necessary regulations needed to protect the instrument and its performers and its orchestras? Why has no space been created to keep the instrument on the street and in public places, for example, on Carnival Sunday? Yes, those are the questions.
Okay, first of all, some steel bands have attempted amplification on Carnival Monday and Tuesday. However, that is a very costly exercise. And as many people don't know, but to manage a steel band, coming out to take part in panorama competition, a large band may spend as much as $500,000 for that carnival season. And then by the time you're looking at amplification to bring your band out on the road, that is at a cost that the funds that we get do not really cover. Yes, we have proposed many times to allow steel bands to come back on the road, do a designated route, because when a steel band meets up with a brass band on the road on Carnival Monday and Tuesday, they drown us out. So you have to stop playing with your masqueraders, with chip to them until they pass you. And the fact is that those large mass bands have much more masqueraders than us. We have proposed, yes, everybody going to the Savannah, going Piccadilly, going downtown, going Adams Smith Square, going Victoria Square. But certain streets be also made part of the carnival route where steel bands alone will parade with their masqueraders. Trinidad has been encouraging our steel bands, not just to be panorama bands, but to come out on the road on Carnival Monday and take part in competitions. And we're pushing that at the regional level. So we start to build back the appearance of steel bands on the street at a regional level, where most bands have a lot of women now, a lot of young ladies. They are designing, they're creating, and you can get your players to create a mass band, and you know, for your community, and you come out into the regional carnivals. For in Port of Spain, the large bands, Massy Trinidad All-Stars is on the road every year. We do Juve, we have Mass and Carnival Monday, and we have our traditional Sailor Mass and Carnival Tuesday. Right? We are one of the few bands that still perform right through on Carnival Monday and Tuesday. And one band of the year, back to back in 2014 and 2015 with our offerings. And as Rosalind said, you know, steel bands can help in developing the respect for the historical aspect of Carnival. You know, I mean, we have thought about it, having a competition where we'd go back in history. To me, I will say, and I support Rosalind, we need to have in our schools cultural education. Cultural education, pan, mass, calypso, chutney, everything to do with our culture, because our young people are losing the culture. We're not teaching them it, they're not understanding it, they don't know anything much about it. But Carnival, as Rosin said, we're supposed to have the greatest parade in the streets in the world. We're the Mecca of Carnival, as people say. But we are losing that Mecca to the fact that we are not maintaining and making sure our young people learn our culture. I've been to Brazil many times, and they teach the culture in schools. Many countries teach culture in school. And if we taught pan, we have pan in classrooms, but we have mass, we have calypso, and develop a healthy competition during the course of the year. So as these youngsters grow, they now take on that development. So the fact that, you know, steel bands can come back on the road, but we have to be in sync with the fact that those big DJs, we cannot compete with them. Give us a designated route that steel bands can parade on. We all will go to the Savannah, yes, as a little jam. But this way, you encourage the bands to come back out in the road. There's a cost. It's funding. Carnival belongs to the government. Carnival is composed of pan, mass, and calypso, and funding from the government in relation to us providing the best carnival we can does not happen. And rightly, as Dr. Thomas said and what Ms. Gabriel said, whatever money you are given, you don't get it all at once that you could best deal with it. You mightn't get, you say you get this and they give you Y, and then Y comes in trickles, and you have bills and debts to pay like everyone else. But I believe the proclamation of the pan as a national instrument of Trinidad and Tobago will allow for us to do a lot more in terms of that, but it will also tie mass and calypso to it, because this is what has grown our carnival culture. And we need to maintain the carnival culture. And the fact that we introduced pan in schools. More girls took to learning pan in schools. And as a result, now you have almost every band. 50% of the band is females. Some bands is 70 and 80%. And they are willing to take on those responsibilities and carry on. So if we introduce cultural education as mandatory in schools, all aspects, I think in the long run of Carnival, this great spectacle will continue to become what it is, and continue to encourage people to visit Trinidad and Tobago for that.
Okay, thank you for that. And I think, I think we have to shut down our forum pretty soon, but there are some important questions which I think I want to get some answers to. So I'm going to sort of manage the rest of the time. Yeah, so again, a question for Ms. Hernandez. During COVID, I thought Pan Trinbago missed a great opportunity to internationalize Panorama by including online submissions from foreign bands. While it may not be practical to bring down bands from places like Sweden or Japan to participate, online provides an opportunity for worldwide interest and attention. This would also translate into revitalizing institutions like Pan is Beautiful on an international basis. Is anything like this in the works for the future?
I must say yes. During COVID, we did do a lot of virtual programs because of the fact we saw an opportunity where we could start developing that. But you have to remember, the infrastructure in Trinidad and Tobago is not ready yet for the kinds of things we're talking about. And particularly, Pan Trinbago at this time is now rebuilding the organization. We're now rebranding the organization, coming out of a turbulent period of a few years where nobody wanted to have anything to do with Pan Trinbago because of the actions and the activities of the previous executive. We have now turned around the organization and we want to build. We also look at the fact that Pan is not just Carnival. Pan is year-round. And things like Pan is Beautiful, the Steel Band Music Festival, both for the juniors and the seniors, are things we want to introduce. We also want to reintroduce Pan in the 21st century, Pan down memory lane, which allows steel bands to look at modern music as compared to old music. We also looked at the fact, last year in 2022, we did Taste of Carnival. And it was a concept we created where the singer bands did Pan in the Sand Coach and the big bands did the musical showdown. And worldwide viewers looked at it and people found this is a product that we can do outside of Carnival. So it is something we're looking at. And then remember, August is Pan month in Trinidad and Tobago. When Prime Minister Manning declared the steel pan as the national instrument of Trinidad and Tobago in 1992, on August 30th of that year, Pan Trinbago at that time declared also that August is Pan month in Trinidad and Tobago. And in that month, we have Emancipation Day, which we have steel bands and parade. Lavender Steel Band Foundation, they have steel bands and parade. We have also introduced the Pan and Powder concept, a celebration of Pan in that month. Pan on the Avenue didn't take place last year, but it will return. We also look at Independence Day. So we are now creating a year-round calendar that allows our steel bands to continue its development for the young people and the old people. And then we have Pan Trip Cup, which is a competition or a show that allows the bands to learn chutney music, Indian music, which we will use to celebrate Indian Arrival Day in Trinidad and Tobago. So that in terms of developing the Pan, yes. Pan is Beautiful, World Steel Band Music Festival, yes. These things are going to be coming back as we work to build back the organization.
And last of all, apparently one of the members of the audience is asking, is it such a healthy development to have 75% of Pan players being female? And then ask, should it not be 50-50? Your thought.
As I said, introducing Pan in schools, the female students graduated to learn the instrument. The young boys still, they were not so keen. So as a result, we have this predominance of females in Pan. But we still feel that to bring back a greater number of our young males and remove them from the crime, we have to use the steel band. We have to use the pan as that instrument to bring them into the panniers. Panniers, again, as our president would say, are sacred spaces. It's community soul, and it is where we can now develop our young people. But having something, yes, it has its problems, but we women, we can rationalize a lot more. And I think it's healthy because it allows young women the opportunity to take on responsibilities that we would normally have. So as I said, we now have women who are managers of bands. We have young girls who are learning the skills of welding, who are learning the skills of pan construction and pan tuning. So it's a cycle we're going through. But remember, our country, we have a lot of females. So this is our national instrument, and this is the area in which they can operate. Certainly, we have to manage the interactions, but I think it's healthy, and we see further development.
Okay, thank you for that. And for Dr. Thomas, again, a question prefaced by a statement. I'm unable to grasp what Tobago October Carnival product is to look like, despite the articulations made by Dr. Thomas. Is such a product under design? What are the unique features likely to make it different from the Trinidad event?
All right, thank you. Well, if I can go back to statements I made regarding the Tobago October Carnival. Tobago October Carnival has just begun. It began under this administration, but its beginnings didn't start with this administration. Outlining years of effort with a peculiar thinking as to what kind of carnival-like activity to put in Tobago during the October period is what has become the October Carnival. Bearing in mind, prior to that, we had the Tobago Fest as another carnival-like activity in October. And for whatever reason, that didn't blossom in the way that it was intended to. So any regarding what the Tobago product is like, or what it ought to look like, or what plans we have for it, cannot sensibly or logically be answered now, because it is in fact a burgeoning product, and the question answers in its growth. The question is answered through its growth, all right? So, however, this is why I kind of preface my comment, my presentation as well, on the business of how we plan. So, however, the planning for this thing looks next year, all right, will determine exactly what kind of features, right, will be more visible next year, if that is the case, as well as what is actually presented, right? Which is why I asked those poignant questions. What does the planning look like? Who determines what is presented, etc. But all those questions cannot now be answered in any conclusive way, for the event has just begun.
Okay, thank you for that. And the other question to you, Dr. Thomas, again prefaced by a statement. I appreciate the candid presentation, Dr. Thomas. Will over-tourism in Tobago also be given consideration in your deliberations?
Well, of course, I think one of the things I was trying to do in my presentation was pushing folks to contemplate a broader perspective regarding how we think about the thing called Carnival and other types of festivals. And that's why I made such careful references to the size of the place, to the geographies of Carnival, if we could consider them to be something what they are, all right, as well as the impact. Now, one of the things mandate as part of our strategic plan at the festival as to what kind of environmental impact festivals have on the island, all right? So that naturally speaks to the question of not just over tourism, but the kind of tourism that is relevant or appropriate for a place like Tobago, all right? So this is why I am very careful as to not offer immediate and knee-jerk responses to, well, what is the Tobago product looking like? That has to be determined out of had consultations, and first we have to determine what consultations actually mean, right, or what we hope to get from them, right, as well as a careful and sober conversation regarding how Carnival impacts everybody, all right? We have a lot of folks in Tobago who I know constantly complain about the noise of the year, and Carnival, the music that we celebrate and like to go and masquerade in the streets too, right, impacts certain people in other ways. So how do we now engineer a conversation around the Tobago product and how to have it navigate those kinds of passions and contestations? To me, the most sensible approach is to begin talking about how do we imagine this thing to be, right? And have that conversation be an ongoing thing in forums like these and more, right? Rather than think to immediately try to isolate particular features and call it that. And then we realize, well, it didn't work next year and it becomes something else. But I think it's the other way around. The reverse is actually true. Plan in an ongoing way and determine really how Carnival impacts everybody.
Thank you very much, Dr. Thomas. And the last question is going to be posed to Ms. Gabriel. And where is that question in the mix here? Yes, Ms. Gabriel, what do you think can be done to direct more of the government subventions and sponsorship toward historical/traditional mass? And what can be done to incentivize more of the traditional elements of mass into the parade of the bands?
Well, this question relates, I believe, to what I said earlier, that we don't have a nursery for mass currently. So that what has evolved now has really been taken out of what I believe is the worst of Brazil Carnival, because I know the workings, all the mass that you see that we call feather mass or bikini and beads comes off the internet. I could be in the wire bender's yard in Belmont and I see some band leaders come in with a whole pile of copies in their hand and they showing the wire bender, well, I want this piece of this one and this piece of that one. And it's all what they see from the Brazil mass, most of it. And it is, to me, a result of the lack of education that we failed to give our people. I think that it is a campaign that we would need to re-educate on what we would like to see in mass, some guidelines put down. I also think that if prizes are strategically reorganized, it could encourage innovation, it could encourage more historical costumes, but it comes back to the fact that every time we try to introduce new prizes, it is always the fact that we don't have the money to do it. I lived it. For 4 years, I lived it. We tried, but it's never easy to change what is there now. There are a set of prizes that are there since Adam was in short pants. And every year they might try to add on a $5 to hit a $10 something, but never enough to make a difference. It is really very frustrating. It's frustrating being in a position where you know what to do, what would help, but you really can't do it because you have X amount of dollars.
Okay, so thank you for your response, Ms. Gabriel. And I just want to let all of you know that, your presentations were well received. one of the comments, the pain of Miss Gabriel is shared by me. Love of my culture, even in my home in far off Toronto, is cause for deep concern. What a wonderful and engaging presentation. So I suppose this was directed to Ms. Gabriel. Maths in the classroom is an excellent idea that will help to harness kids with visual art and craft talent. Then there's another comment, the masquerade is in the pit. We have turned our backs on the arts. This is the inescapable conclusion. And then we go on, the Carnival Museum is a most laudable initiative. It needs to be supported by a website. Great discussion. Do we have any idea of the amounts of profit that are funneled back into the business to increase value and invest in the future? And someone just asked, is Carnival a net negative earner when all the inflows and outflows are considered? We don't have much time, and all I think we have time for is the vote of thanks, which I think I will give and try to be as short as possible. And clearly, this was an event this morning that way surpassed my expectations. I think it is going to be documented to the extent that, we and others will always have access to it. We wish to immortalize this event, and we will be seeking the permission of all the presenters to actually post this forum on our YouTube channel here in SALISES. So given the success that this event has been, I just want to say a few words of thanks to those who would have made it possible. I want to, first of all, thank the staff of SALISES, the entire staff of SALISES, members who have rallied to the cause and made today's effort the success it has been. I want in particular to thank Ms. Francine Allain for her contribution always to supporting the event. Mr. Ephraim Thompson for the technical work. He's a technical mind behind the scenes in the SALISES. And of course, Ms. Tatiana Modest, who despite being on vacation and who has responsibility for this event, generally speaking, has offered support to her temporary replacement, Ms. Elsa Hamilton, who I must thank wholeheartedly and from deep within for the contribution she has made in terms of following up with everyone, seeking advice from Ms. Modest, and making today what it has been. So my heartiest thanks to my staff in SALISES. I also want to give thanks to the team from marketing and communication, in particular, Ms. Joanne Green, who has always been a rock supporting SALISES in all of its events, and Ms. Green and the rest of her marketing team in terms of putting together the beautiful flyer that was posted that invited persons to the forum. I really want to thank Ms. Green and the MNC team for all of the coordinating support they have provided to make this event the success it has been. I want to thank the media in the event that the media is present, and I hope they will give fulsome coverage to what we would have done here today. And last but not least, of course, the 5 panelists who have presented, Ms. Rosalind Gabriel, Dr. Rudolph Watley, Ms. Denise Hernandez, Dr. Charleston Thomas, and just a minute. Yes, it's Dr. Charleston Thomas, Dr. Utley, Dr. Ms. Rosalind Gabriel. Oh yes, and Ms. Paige De Leon. Yeah, so those are the 5 who presented, and I want to really wholeheartedly thank them for taking time off of their busy schedules and being with us today and sharing such wonderful insights that I think will illuminate, thought processes as we think about how we manage Trinidad and Tobago Carnival Product and I dare say improve it. And of course, the virtual audience who were out there, whether you were in Trinidad and Tobago or beyond, we thank you for being part of our effort, and those in particular who have continued to support us, we express considerable thanks to you. All I have to say again, I want to thank, hopefully I did not omit anyone who felt that thanks should have been given to him or her. I want to express thanks to such persons. And all I want to say again is that tomorrow at 9 in the morning, SALISES is having another event in which we're going to have 6 performers from 6 secondary schools in Trinidad, Tobago, and Guyana, presenting on the life and works of Sir Arthur Lewis. Sir Arthur Lewis is the Nobel laureate whom our institute has been named after. And in commemoration of his centennial year, we have every January, the month of his birthday, we have events to celebrate his life and his scholarship. And tomorrow we will have some 6th formers presenting on his work, as well as some academics who will talk a bit about the relevance and importance of the work of Sir Arthur Lewis. So again, thank you all of you for gracing us with your presence, gracing us with your wisdom, your knowledge, and your keen insights. We are extremely appreciative. Have a good day, all of you.
Thank you.
Same to you.